right, as people are coming in, welcome. Glad to see you. Popping in quickly.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah. So we had over 100 registered for today. So yeah, it's been a while. We had a long summer, and then our first meeting was interrupted by Helene and Milton. So I had no power from Helene, and you guys had no power from Milton last month. So here we are. Glad to see you here. And if you would put in the chat where you are viewing from, what migrants are you seeing this week? And where did you see them?
Do they have to be migrants?
No, anything. What birds are you seeing? Okay, Lillian Maniscalco, I hope I said that right, from Cooper City, Florida. So she, someone who knows Anders maybe? And Susan Schottel from Sarasota. Hi, Susan. Thanks for all your help with Raymond Road. Anyone else checking in? Oh, hey, Maureen Dwyer from Haverford Park in Haverford, Pennsylvania. And she's seeing dark-eyed juncos. I actually saw one today. That means it's getting cold in the higher elevations. I'm in Asheville, by the way. Lillian's starting to see coots. Jenny Cherry near the airport in Sarasota. Lots of Canada geese. Tall bird with a yellow tummy. Could be several, probably some sort of a warbler. Jane Rufo is at Wilkinson Road in Sarasota, and she saw pileated woodpecker. Those are great. We have Lori Hoppy from Lakewood Ranch. Glad to have you here. All right. Well, we've got a lot to go over. Oh, here's a few more. Madison Slater from New College. Hey, welcome. Rose-breasted grosbeaks. Good for you. And Alan Gardner in Belmont, Mass. Robins, blue jays, starlings, and a house sparrow. Not a, there's never one, right? Sue Herring. Hi, Sue. Red-shouldered hawk on the roof. Oh, you sent me the picture. Thank you. And lots of nandays in front of the fountain feeders. Yeah.
You know, Karen, they've just found a brant goose in Conservatory Park, which is right over it, right off of University.
Yeah, right on University.
And the brant goose is like almost extremely rare bird for Florida, much less our area. I think for our whole of Florida. But anyway, people might want to try to go see that if they look online how to see the brant goose. And it's off of Conservatory Park.
All right. Okay, so glad you're all here. I'll go over a few housekeeping items because we've got quite a few people participating. We're in a webinar. Please submit your questions to Q&A. You'll see a Q&A at the bottom. If you don't see it, click the three dots that say more. And you'll see Q&A, and that's the questions for, and of course it won't let me go back. So anyway, Q&A will before any questions for Anders in his talk. If you have questions about anything else, put them in the chat and I will answer as necessary. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for to lead the meeting.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be on finally. We got 3 hurricanes and a whole summer between us.
Sarah, maybe we should just tell everybody exactly who you are.
Yes, I was just about to do that. I am
Thank
the new
you.
president. I am Sarah Reisinger. I took over for Jean Doobie in June. So I was on the last webinar that we had of the end of season last season. So it's been quite a few months at this point. So for those of you who haven't seen me, please come up and say hi. Anytime you see me at the Nature Center, I'm there nearly every day. And I try to make the rounds at the boardwalks as much as possible too. So please come say hi, and I'd love to see all of your smiling faces. I have quite a bit to cover, so I'm going to try and do this really quickly because there's a lot going on right now. The Raymond Road development, directly across from the Raymond Road Boardwalk, is going to the Planning Commission on November 21st. There are a bunch of different ways that you guys can help us out with that. Tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m., they will be coming to interview me at the Raymond Road Boardwalk, and I'd really love to show them how much this place is loved and appreciated and well used. So as many people who can show up just with your cameras and binoculars or just to come out and see nature, be present to show them that it really is a well-used
Sarah, who's going to be
boardwalk.
there?
It's ABC 7. So
Right.
WABC is going to be there doing an interview. They're going to be interviewing me, so no one will interview you. Don't have to talk to anyone. I'm just really trying to turn people out so he can understand how popular that this place is. So that's tomorrow. Also Wednesday by noon, we need letters to be sent to the planner. It's at planner@scgov.net. And we will be sending an email shortly after this webinar tonight that will have a click through that you can just click on and send an email to the planner to ask them to recommend denial of rezone 23-30. They are, for any of you who don't know what's going on, they're going to be asking for a rezone of the Smith Farm, which is directly adjacent to the Raymond Road Boardwalk on Raymond Road. They want 170 homes to be put in there. We estimate in order to get the fill high enough on that land to make it buildable, they would need to run a dump truck every 8 minutes for an entire year. Because it sits so low. It's just a concerning project all the way around, and really would be detrimental to the wildlife that we so love and enjoy. So I appreciate any help you have. The email is very, very easy. It's a forum email that will pop up on the link that we send you. Please personalize it as much as possible with why this area is important to you and how this development is completely incompatible with wildlife viewing at that location. After that, then you can still send emails up until 11/21. It's just not going to make it into the packet for the Planning Commission. They will be handed it at the time, so they won't have any chance to review it prior to the meeting. So you can continue to send them, or if you can, it would be great that as many people as possible turn up on November 21st at 5 p.m. Get there early, get your name on the list. You get 3 minutes to speak and just say why this place is special and why this development would make it is incompatible.
Sarah, where are they to go?
They're going to go to Venice. It's going to be in all the emails that we send, the exact location.
Okay.
They're no longer doing the meetings downtown because the building has been
Old.
yes, well, it's old and it's not in use because of the hurricane. Since the hurricane, it's not been in use. So they're down in Venice. So you can write in, you can show up, and then we'll have the interview on ABC, and I will be doing an interview with WSLR on the detail live at 9 a.m. on Thursday. So tune in, write in, show up. I would really, really appreciate that. As far as the Nature Center, just some housekeeping there. Garden update. It is looking so much better. The storms, the 3 storms really took a hit. We had a drought, then we had a flood, then we had winds, and then we had more winds. So the poor garden has really taken one for the team out there. We lost a bunch of trees. However, we did have a couple of gentlemen come this week and were able to write them for us. A couple of volunteers, Christian, who's on our board, and one of his friends were able to get 3 of the trees back up, which is awesome. We've been slowly opening more sections of the garden. We will be having another cleanup this Saturday from 8 to 11, and that will be led by the wonderful Stacy Perry, our new garden manager. If you haven't met her, she's amazing. And final housekeeping item, the donation platforms were down between September 29th and November 3rd. So if you attempted to donate during that time, your card wasn't compromised or anything. It was just, it never went through, and it wasn't really clear that it wasn't going through. So if you did try to donate, please, I encourage you to make that donation again. Check your accounts, make sure it didn't go through first. But we really could use some funding for the gardens and trying to get them back on track. Plus, because the the bird feeding site in front of the fountain has been so popular, we are going to keep that one up, as well as the gazebo, as soon as the gazebo opens back up. So we will have more need for bird seed. If you would like to donate for bird seed as well, that would be amazing. And that's about it. I'm just happy to be here with you guys, and I'm going to pass it back to Margie so we can continue with Anders.
Well, good evening, everybody. Before I introduce Anders, I want to take the liberty of just thanking everybody for their patience that we had to cancel our first September monthly Zoom call. Karen was had intermittent electricity, and it's amazing that she was able to communicate it all with us from Asheville, where she is now apparently pretty much safe and pretty much even got her water restored. And
Boiling water.
Boiling water, not drinking water or
No.
shower water. Oh my gosh. And I really want to thank Sarah Reisinger for stepping in and trying to bail us out with last minute Zooms and Zoom planning for September. And then for October. And then we realized 30 to 40% of all Sarasota had no electricity. So it was a no-go for October. And Anders Gyllenhaal, who we are finally having talk with us this month, was extremely gracious and patient, and apparently, having lived in Florida a number of times, is extremely understanding about the vagaries and yuckiness of hurricanes. So thank you all, and thank you all for understanding that we had to cancel our October meeting at the last minute. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Anders Gyllenhaal tonight, and he'll talk about the extensively researched book he and his wife, Beverly Gyllenhaal, wrote, A Wing and a Prayer, A Race to Save Our Vanishing Birds. So unfortunately, Beverly is not up to joining us today, and we wish her well.
Yes, thank you.
Anders and Beverly Gyllenhaal are birders, spouses, and retired veteran journalists who traveled over 25,000 miles in their RV in 2021 across the Americas, observing bird conservation firsthand, chronicling ways to save our beloved birds from the brink of extinction and hurricanes, I'm sure. Their book was published last year by Simon & Schuster. As journalists, Anders and Beverly worked for decades as reporters, editors, and photographers. Beverly was a feature writer, then food editor, and finally syndicated columnist and book author. Anders was an investigative reporter at the Miami Herald, then went on to become the executive editor at newspapers in Raleigh, Minneapolis, Miami, and Washington. He's long been active in journalism circles, serving on the board of the Pulitzer Prizes, Society of Newspaper Editors and Journalism Funding Partners, a new startup supporting local news across the country. So as I understand it, and I'm sure Anders will fill us in, Beverly and Anders started following birds and photographing and writing about them for magazines and newspapers, and that's what led them to write their book about the urgency of trying to save so many birds that seem to be vanishing. So I really appreciate that Anders is talking to us and reminding us of the need for hope and an urgent call to action. Birds are dying at an unprecedented pace. And I think Anders is going to offer us hopefully some promises and steps for action that we all can take. Thank you so much for being here and for your phenomenal patience and graciousness in the light of everything going on here. Thank you.
Lily, thank you, Margie, and Kevin and Sue. It's great to be with you. Now, do we switch over here to?
You can share now, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for being a part of this. It's a pleasure to talk with you about our book and to share my photos with you and our travels, and to talk mostly about birds, which is our favorite topic. And Beverly is not part of this, but you'll see her all over the place in this presentation. Our book is about the passionate cast of characters: scientists, birders, wildlife experts, hunters, ranchers, philanthropists, it's a long list, who are working to save birds at a fragile time, as you all know. We're in this extraordinary juncture between what we've come to think of as two opposing forces at work at the same time when it comes to birds. One is this enormous pressure that's eroded, more than half the species in North America, leaving, about half the species in some level of decline. At the same time, there's this whole series of responses to those pressures, and that includes, innovative ideas in conservation and promising technologies, a really long list of interesting rescue missions all across the hemisphere. And that's really the focus of our book. The technology, I think you all know this, you're into this, of bird study is advancing at just a head-spinning pace. And it's a very encouraging one. At the same time, new ideas are emerging about basically how can we coexist with birds at a time of environmental disruption. And that's why we call this, in the title of the book, a race. Because which of these forces are going to prevail over time? We came away from 300 interviews with all the key people in this realm, pretty convinced that this will be decided in a fairly short period of time. And Elizabeth Gray, your CEO of your Audubon Society, puts it, she told us, we have about a decade to get this right. And I also want to say that our topic, of course, is birds, but this is a slice of the broader environmental story that's a theme of our time. And birds just happen to be a particularly good lens through which to watch and understand what's happening. I want to stress that we're not scientists. Obviously, we're not bird experts. I think we're probably not even the best birders on this program tonight. But we're journalists and have been, for our whole careers, storytellers. And what we wanted to do was to translate the, enormous breadth of what we found in a way that would resonate with all kinds of people. Obviously, we've been captivated by birds. We're in, as you are, awe of their just amazing mechanics, their beauty, and their critical role as nature's workhorses. We're learning steadily more the intricacies of how birds contribute to the world we live in. You're familiar with this, but I'll just sort of go through this as a sort of a starting point for our discussion. They pollinate plants, flowers, and trees. They consume 500 tons of insects a year, and those are insects that are not now biting us. They fertilize the land and oceans. They clean up the refuse of nature. They spread seeds that fuel forests and grasslands. We ourselves got hooked on birds about 12 years ago. What happened was we were living in Washington, D.C., right downtown, surrounded by concrete and glass, and we started the need to get out of into the countryside on weekends, and we you know, we both grown up with bird feeders like a lot of people, and we knew, you know, common birds, bluebirds and cardinals, owls, but we didn't really know what many of the birds that we were seeing out there as we traveled, and we were campers, so we would camp. So we began, like many people in this pursuit, just to get interested. Well, what was that? And we got the guidebooks out, and I started taking pictures, and we'd go back at night and look through those pictures and try to figure out, you know, which birds were which. This was way before the Merlin app could instantly identify. And I think that this experience of sort of digging into the books, learning out, you know, which birds had pink legs and which ones' beaks were orange on the bottom and brown on the top, etc. And so we got more and more into birds, and as I guess we would admit to being obsessed, certainly enough to give our kids all kinds of ways of making fun of us. And eventually we started a website, flyinglessons.us, and that's listed in the chat there if you haven't come across it. It's Flying Lessons. What we're learning from the birds was the concept. And I started writing mostly for the Washington Post as my full-time career was ending. And that is what eventually led us to the book. One of the underlining themes of this is the relationship between people and birds. And an unavoidable conclusion we came after all this discussion and talk and travel was that, you know, Americans love birds until they get in our way. Sort of reminds me of the case you're working on right now. You know, over the past century, and this is another piece of the foundation that's important for the discussion that we'll have, is over a century, the fortunes of North America's bird scape has sort of swung back and forth, up and down. Whole segments of species have been threatened. And the thing to remember, this is the important thing, is that Americans in each step of this, of our history with birds, have come forward and done the things that needed to be done. That dates back to the you know, early 1900s when herons and egrets, and these are both pictures from Florida. Spoonbill obviously is a Florida picture.
Actually, you're not sharing, Anders.
What? Uh-oh.
I didn't realize. I thought you were doing an intro, and
Okay.
when I stopped the share when I started mine, so I apologize. That is my.
No problem. You haven't missed all that much, just some of my best pictures. That's okay. So let me
Sorry.
how about now? Is that shared?
Yes, we got it. We're on the bar
Okay.
now. Okay.
So
Now
I'm just going to skip through that. We talked about the birds and the roles they play, and you know, birds that we did know and some of the birds we didn't know, and then we're up to this sort of history. And here talking about how in the early 1900s, birds like, you know, the heron and the egret, spoonbill, as I mentioned, these are all from Florida. When the women's hat issue arose, and these birds were nearly wiped out, a big part of Florida history, of course, stepped forward and passed migratory laws and eventually put into place migratory protections that have basically brought many of these birds back either to strength or to be stronger than they were, to save them. And then in the 30s and 40s, the role of ducks and geese shot, you know, hunted to extinction in many cases. And that's the point at which duck groups came forward and passed laws, put into place legislation and funding that has made game birds, you know, the strongest segment of the birding world. And then in the 60s and 70s, when we realized we were poisoning eagles and ospreys and condors and many of the larger birds, that's the point at which, of course, we passed the Endangered Species Act, established EPA, and general environmental awareness was rising. So there's the history of stepping forward, but today's crisis is different and deeper than in the past. You know, we recently witnessed the most significant avian research in decades when a group, and I suspect many of you are familiar with this, of scientists got together, 7 different agencies from the Cornell Lab to American Bird Conservancy, figured out for the first time how to count the number of birds in North America. Really interesting story. And we, of course, tell this in the book, how this all came about. And what they found, in addition to the number of birds, was that we had lost a third, almost a third of the breeding birds in North America, 3 billion birds between 1970s and now. You know, this was fascinating research, and it explained a lot. But there, in our minds, and this is what we got interested in writing this book about, they raised as many questions as answers. I mean, what is being done? What can be done? You know, who is leading this work? There's so much that's been written about birds. All those books, you go to the library and you got a good book on almost every major species. The most recently, owls, and a wonderful book, new book out on eagles. But what we didn't find was anything that looked at, well, what is being done on a global scale to try to address this? So we decided the best way to try to tell that story, after we did a whole lot of interviewing with key people and figured out the right path, was to get out and travel to where the work is being done. It so happened we had been traveling in those days in a 23-foot Airstream, showing that here. It's appropriately called a flying cloud. And we converted this into a kind of a mobile office, and it's about 50 square feet. So that makes it really a nice challenge to sit there for 2 years traveling together. The marriage is still strong. That's not why she's not here. This picture, I have to tell you, makes it look a lot better than it actually was. We sort of cleaned it up. Our friend, a good photographer, took this picture. And what we did was we took off, and we started in our home where we live in Raleigh, North Carolina. We traveled down the East Coast, spent a lot of time in Florida. You'll see a lot of Florida stories in this book. Then we went all across the country to Wyoming, through the Southwest, up, spent a lot of time in California. From there, we stopped, flew to Hawaii, spent time there because there's a lot of things going on there, you're probably aware. And then we came back across the country, and we also spent time in South America, an important part of the story. So today I wanted to touch on, you know, some of the stories that give you a sense of the rescue of North American birds, where it is, what people are up against, you know, how fascinating and complex this work is. And mostly importantly, you know, what are the prospects of having impact? I want to start with a bird that I suspect many of you are familiar with, the Florida grasshopper sparrow. Not a high-profile bird, of course, but it turned out that one of your key species in terms of the status, the Florida grasshopper sparrow, is the target of this, you know, desperate scientific intervention up around Orlando. This is a story we followed for about 5 years now, because starting about 15 years ago, the population just suddenly, the bottom dropped out, and they fell to just 44 remaining breeding birds left, very few compared to the thousands that had been there. And you know, what was going on? Why was this happening? Nobody could figure it out. And so the scientists had to do you know, a kind of full court press to try to figure out what could be done to save this bird, because as you may recall, the last bird to go extinct was the seaside sparrow, also in Florida, and they didn't want this to happen twice. So what they did was they set up a kind of a laboratory deal where they bred the birds in a captive setting, took them out onto the Florida prairie where their habitat is, and put them back into the wild, sort of watched over them like helicopter parents, built boundaries around them to keep out predators, raise the nest to avoid flooding. And little by little, the Florida grasshopper sparrow, here's the team taking them out. The birds are in those little boxes. The grasshopper sparrow as population has come back. Here's a picture of one taken off. And in many ways, it's an inspiring story, and it shows what can be done on the edge of extinction. But it's also a really worrisome one because it shows you, how often we wait till the very last minute to do something, and that's one of the issues we explore in this book. Why do we always wait until the birds are in deep trouble before taking action? This is one of our very favorite birds. One of the part of the warbler family, a cerulean warbler, and we followed this bird from its summer grounds in the Appalachian all the way down through Gulf of Mexico and over to Colombia and Ecuador, where they go in the winter season. This is roughly has lost about a third of its species over time, almost half, depending on who you want to count. And it's roughly about a third of the birds in North America that are migrating, mostly to Central and South America. And so we thought this was a bird that represented this story, and what can be done to try to protect them. And it turns out it's often a matter of trying to enlist private landowners. This is a bird that's a forest bird. How do you improve the forest to try to give this bird the habitat it needs? And how do you work with the Southern Hemisphere, a very different world than ours, not having the resources and the funding, 12 different countries spread across Latin America, and very much different approaches to this. That makes it very hard for birds that are already under pressure to thrive. And of course, this is just one example of the many birds that are in this fix. Prothonotary warbler, you see them sometimes. Grosbeak, a wonderful bird. Hooded warbler, you've seen many of these birds. The Rembrandt of birds, painted bunting. And then in South America, the birds that they are joining up with, and the other half of the equation, this is a toucanet. Many different kind of tanagers. We have basically 3 tanagers. There's dozens and dozens of them. There's a flame rose, a masked flower piercer, which is also a tanager. Amazing numbers of hummingbirds, and another tanager. We took this picture in Costa Rica last year, and all kinds of birds. This is a collared aracari, like this. The point is, and we try to explore this in the chapter that follows the cerulean warbler, North and South hemispheres need to work together much more effectively than they have in the past if we're going to deal with the migratory birds. This is a very important part of this equation. How's that going to happen? There are some signs it's getting a little bit better, but there's still a very long way to go before that is really effectively done. One of the biggest challenges for birds, of course, is how they thrive on ever diminishing chunks of habitat. And the best example of that is the Florida scrub jay, a bird that is probably the most studied bird in the eastern US. 90% of the habitat in the scrublands, as the interior land in Florida, has been converted to homes and businesses and theme parks. And 90% of the Florida scrub jay's population has evaporated, leaving them on these tiny little chunks of land where the up and coming young birds can't reach other birds and inform the family and build them. So there's this huge effort being undertaken, led by John Fitzpatrick, the director emeritus of the Cornell Lab, and the Archbold group in there near Lake Okeechobee, slowly figuring out what does it take, what does the habitat have to be like in order to protect birds when there's less and less habitat. And it's finally starting to succeed. What they do is so interesting, and this is another story we tell, of course, as they track all call them teenage birds, to figure out what are they doing during the time before they start breeding what is it that they need to have a successful breeding life? And so that story is representative of many, many different species. On the opposite end of the country is the story of the California spotted owl. And this is the subject of the world's largest project using the science of sound to study birds. The spotted owl lives way up in the Sierra Nevada mountains in Eastern California. It's so remote and so vast that it's impossible to figure out where these birds are and what they need. So what scientists have done is they figured out how to set up recording devices as that technology has advanced, set up recording devices all across the habitat, roughly about 1 million acres where the birds have been, to figure out where they are, what's happening to them, and what can be done to protect them from predators, including other owls that are moving in, and stabilize that species. The importance of many birds like this is the California spotted owl is kind of a franchise bird in the forest there. If the bird isn't there, all kinds of other things fall apart. And this is a story, we tell over and over again, how important different species are to the success of the environment. And the California spotted owl is a really interesting story, because you may recall the cousin of the spotted owl in the Northwest is one of the most unsuccessful ventures in conservation history, a huge calamity between the environmental groups and the lumber industry. And today that bird is in deep, deep trouble. It's a different story with the California spotted owl. And that's why we wanted to tell that story. In Hawaii, and you've probably heard a lot about Hawaiian birds, because it's such a different world where the islands have sort of been overrun by all kinds of non-native species that have undermined the environment there. In Hawaii, they're trying to save the last of the honey creepers, birds like this iiwi and the akiapala owl and the palila. These birds have been in struggles for decades because of the threat of malaria transmitted by mosquitoes. And for a long time, it was kind of a standoff. The birds moved up the mountains. The mosquitoes had to stay lower down, because that's where they breeded, with the temperature just the way they needed it. But climate change has changed the entire landscape. The mosquitoes began to move up as the climate has warmed. They are now approaching all the rest of the last 15 of the 17 honey creepers that are left are threatened. So what the scientists and a whole group of a massive undertaking have done is try to figure out, well, how can we stop the spread of mosquitoes? And what they've turned to is a really interesting story that we tell in the book about how you created another mosquito in a laboratory. It's infused with a kind of a bacteria that, when they release these birds and they mate with the wild mosquitoes, it acts as a kind of a birth control, and that's supposed to stop the spread of this disease. It's just now happening. It's too soon to tell whether this is working or not, but it sort of illustrates the dimensions of how far and how extreme some of these rescue missions are. And, are they going to work is the question. And it gets, in this chapter, we also get into the whole idea of cloning birds, which we won't talk about tonight because it gets so complicated and so interesting, and it's so early on, it's not quite there yet, but another interesting part of how do you engineer birds in a way that will help save them. The last story I wanted to tell is about the red-falcated woodpecker, and this is a bird that looked doomed just a decade ago. But what has come to rescue the bird is none other than the U.S. military. Now, what happened was as the country developed, military bases have become kind of islands of undisturbed land, home to more than 500 species of rare birds, animals, insects, and plants. And at first, military commanders, when this issue first began to arise with the development of the Endangered Species Act, they didn't want to have anything to do with trying to protect species. They had plenty of other things that they were working on, trying to defend the country, prepare for conflicts. So there was a standoff between one branch of the federal agencies and the military over this. And the way it played out was that in Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, this commander took such care to go after these birds, knocking their trees down, and finally excuse me one second. The Environmental Protection Act, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service filed suit, convinced military commanders that they had to take this seriously, and that has happened. And over the last 15 years, the most sophisticated and aggressive approach to birds and other species is being undertaken by the military. And the reason is they, sort of argue that, well, if we're going to do what we need to do, we've got to take care and follow the law. And it's a model program. And the red cockaded woodpecker is a great example of this, because this bird is a really tough little cookie. It is the pickiest bird you could ever imagine. It will only live in one kind of tree, or two sometimes, depending on where. The longleaf pine, that tree has to be 80 to 100 years old, and the inside, it has to be dying but not yet dead for the bird to build this cavity inside this tree. And because of the complexity of that work, it can take 10 years for a bird to be able to slowly build its nest. These birds don't have that kind of time. Their populations began to decrease until the military figured out how to build a equivalent of this cavity that could be installed in the tree to look just like what they would like to have, and put in there in one afternoon. And they installed a bunch of these man-made cavities, call them government housing, and the birds took right to them. And gradually, the military has helped to restore this bird on a much more promising population track, 25 years ahead of schedule. It's a really interesting story, sort of an unexpected one, but it shows us that if we want to do it, it can be done, and this is an illustration of that. So, mostly this was a great adventure for us, but it wasn't always easy. I mean, we spent our second half of our careers sitting at desks. We're getting a little older, and suddenly we found ourselves following people who thought nothing of walking 10 miles up a mountain. It happened in Hawaii, or traipsing through swamps where we tried to understand what was happening with the woodpeckers that are missing in many parts of the South. And we found in that process, and I won't tell you too many war stories about trying to keep up with these folks, but we found, this is hard work. These people are risking their lives and well-being to try to save these birds, and their work is slowly, gradually paying off in many of these cases. The second half of the book looks at the broader issues that surround this whole question of the future of birds in North America. What's going on that is helping not just individual species, but the wider expanse of birds. And there's good and bad news here. We devote one chapter to the growing realization among a group of ranchers and farmers, that who are making room for birds, not only is that, good for wildlife, but it proves to be a more productive and profitable operation to be working on sustainable ranches. And it's a really important concept because agriculture is a big part of the problem in terms of how it has changed the landscape of the land. Grassland birds are the hottest hit of all the different species. Another really encouraging story that we tell is told by the same group of scientists who conducted the 3 billion bird research. And it's a project they've developed. They thought, well, we proved that the birds are being lost, but what are we going to do about that? So a bunch of scientists came together and created what's called the Road to Recovery. They have identified 112 different species that they call are sort of at a tipping point, and trying to get the kind of information that will help them to figure out how to protect these birds. And this is a very interesting story, and they're very critical of a lot of the US policy when it comes to wildlife, and it's starting to take root, and it's a very interesting one. That's Pete Mara, he's heading that, and here's John Fitzpatrick, the director emeritus, talking to Beverly. Another really important lesson in what can be done when we want to is game bird conservation. For generations, we've had this remarkable model for how to save species and to raise billions of dollars, which comes from the sale of ammunition, guns, and bows and arrows. And that enables the protection of breeding grounds and migratory grounds. We've built this network of wildlife refuges, all these national wildlife refuges, which in part are designed to be able to have a place to go hunting. And also this has fueled all kinds of research. There's a division between many traditional birders and hunters, but there shouldn't be, because even though hunting is a worrisome thing to many birders, this is where a lot of the conservation is being done. And this is where a lot of the advances are being done. At a time when most species are in decline, the populations of game birds are up more than 50%. So it's proving, in effect, that it can be done. Why aren't we taking those same models and applying them to these other species that are in need of help? That's the good news in terms of different things that are being done that work. But the book also lays out, sort of what stands in the way. And of course, at the top of that list is habitat loss, followed by, let's call it, the ambivalence of a country that's always had, hesitation about devoting resources to wildlife management. It struggles over economic impacts of this, the desire, like Florida shows in many different ways, to be able to develop willy-nilly. And the sad fact is that our state and federal conservation system has failed to keep up with the losses of birds. We've had times when we've done great work as a country and among our agencies, but that we are not in that time now, as you know. And it's pretty clear that the leadership on this is not going to come from our political leaders or our government agencies. That's particularly true after this most recent election. Congress has proven itself unable to make decisions. The country has allowed the Endangered Species Act, which turned 50 in December, to become so underfunded and backed up that it can take years, sometimes decades, just to get a species assessed about whether it should be on the list or not. We have the model system within our reach for how to protect wildlife, but we've been unwilling to update it as the situation has changed. And a great example of that is the most significant legislation in years, which is the Restoring America's Wildlife Act, passed the House 2 years ago, moved forward in the Senate, looked like it was on the verge of passage. This would provide just the kind of funding that's needed for many of these species. It can't move forward, unable to make it stall, despite ordinance as very much of a bipartisan idea. On the other hand, there's a lot of leadership is coming from other places, including the nonprofits, Cornell Lab, Audubon Society, very important, American Conservancy, the Nature Conservancy. It's a long list, Ducks Unlimited, and philanthropies of all kinds are responding, especially now to the challenges of climate change. And many of those initiatives about the climate have a big impact on birds. And most significantly, you know, I think you all see how birds are drawing more public interest than ever before. Some of that is due to the pandemic, where we sort of rediscovered birds, Americans did, way up. You couldn't even get bird seed. You know, we sell $4 billion worth of bird seed each year, and we ran out during that time. And that interest that was fueled by the pandemic seems to have stuck. So that's very impressive. The last, you know, comprehensive research found that more than 90 million people consider themselves birders. And now that's a number that is really impressive and ought to be able to push through the kind of things that are needed. And, you know, a great example of some of the new technology things are that almost a million people are using Cornell Labs eBird app. I'm sure all of you are. That app has produced now 1.6 billion checklists on birds, and it's turned from a kind of a tool for birders following species into the largest citizen scientist project in the world. And of course, the Merlin bird idea is spreading like wildlife to help people figure out, you know, what they're hearing. So we're in a time when, you know, anyone willing to can help birds in different ways, in small ways, in your own world. You joining organizations like yours, but also at the end of A Wing and a Prayer, there's an afterword with dozens of things that you can do to help. You know, everything from protecting birds around your homes to supporting birds in the marketplace with, you know, what you buy, coffee, maple syrup, etc. Meat now, Audubon initiative, contribute to the nonprofits and research centers, all have important impact that can really make a difference. So we end up mostly hopeful that this country will do what has it done in the past and take advantage of a unique moment, in that, you know, a time when the knowledge of birds is deeper than ever before. We know what it is they need. We have a huge amount of understanding about them. We can participate in ways you couldn't do just a little while ago. And the power of avian research itself is accelerating. So let me stop here and thank you all for joining us. And let's see what kind of questions and thoughts you have about all this.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What I'm struck by, Anders, is how mammoth the breadth and depth of the research that you did and had to do.
Yeah.
Somehow I hadn't really comprehended just this is sort of what must have been a mammoth undertaking in terms of what you were, how to figure out what to write about and what to focus on. Are there, what are the areas that you feel like maybe you couldn't get to that you wish you could have?
Sure. And I'll sort of talk a little bit about how we did figure out how to approach this. We started off, you know, as you would expect, by talking to about 100 people across all segments of this field, government, you know, officials and nonprofit leaders and a lot of scientists, try to figure out where the places are, where were the junctures where the most interesting things were happening. And we wanted to be able to cover the whole gamut of that. And that's why we chose the stories that we did. Are you signaling something, Sue? Oh, okay. Are we all right? Yeah. And so what happened as we went was we realized that the story we wanted to tell was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we kept expanding that, but we also wanted to move pretty quickly because, you know, we based a lot of it off this original research that we'd lost 3 billion birds. That was kind of the starting point. We reconstruct that research as a way to add drama to how this came. So we didn't want too much time to pass before we told that story. The parts that I think we didn't get to that we would have liked to would be to try to understand both the failures of the government agencies after many successes and the role of private industry in all this. Private industry has not been provided the leadership until recently, and that's coming because individual consumers and board of directors are pushing particularly industries that play some sort of role in this. Think of food and coffee and these kind of players, recognizing that they need to have sustainability credentials in order to satisfy their constituencies. Some of that comes down into greenwashing, which I'm sure you've heard talk of some, but a lot of it is quite genuine. So I wish we, if we were to tell more stories, and we do continue to talk about this on our website, we continue to write smaller pieces. Those are two areas where I think there needs to be more pressure. I also think if you look over the history of conservation in this country, leadership has come, if you want to identify presidents, from four key presidents, FDR, Nixon, Teddy Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson. Two Republicans, two Democrats. They stepped forward at times when this was needed, sometimes with support of public, sometimes without it, and made things happen. And so one of the questions that I'd love to see explored deeper is, where is the leadership coming from now? Is this not something that we care enough about? And can we put pressure on? Was it not always, these presidents didn't always do this because they just wanted to. Nixon was not really interested in being the true environmental champion that he was. Lyndon Johnson was kind of in the same category. So those are stories that I think are really interesting, and I'd love to get back into them.
Yeah, I can imagine. So we have questions from an anonymous attendee. How has citizen science and privatized initiatives functioned together to reveal the critical state of birds? Which do you think has been more effective in supporting bird conservation, or is it a mix? Maybe you've sort of answered. Do you think there are avenues to take to make the two more cohesive?
Well, the big star in citizen science is eBird. And this has been a remarkable advancement. We are writing a series right now on our website called 3 Billion Birds Revisited, because it's the 5-year anniversary of when that research came out. And so we're going back and re-interviewing everybody. And one of the biggest changes, and there's going to be a piece that will run at the end of next week, looking at eBird's role and going from this, app that helped birders into being such a deep and robust amount of data from birders that scientists can use that to figure out where birds are thriving and where they're not. Sometimes the same species. A great example we look at in this case is the great blue heron, which overall its population is in decline, but there's many pockets where the blue heron is thriving. Why is that happening there, and what can be done about it? The success of eBird far outweighs what's happening with private industry. Private industry is basically using eBird data in many cases to try to figure out, for instance, well, how can I grow my coffee in a way that will be more productive? How can I tell by the birds on my coffee farm whether I am creating a sustainable environment or not? So I think that the citizen science, which any one of us can contribute to in a big way, right, just by using eBird, is really the clear winner in this, and is only beginning now to be able to use this for scientific purposes. Does that answer the question? I was hoping I was getting it right.
Yeah, I think that sounds,
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, we can't actually have the people that ask the questions, the webinar
Yeah, that's
format.
fine. Yeah, sure.
And it's interesting, the way you answered it, somehow I hadn't thought, well, duh, eBird and Cornell's initiative with Merlin as well as eBird is just astounding in this regard. I
Yeah,
think
it really is, and particularly because it's free, and it is going to be worldwide over time. It's spreading to many countries beyond the U.S. There hasn't been an alternative to it because it's so good, and it's been very successful, and that's one of the things I think that can unite South America and North America.
yes.
If you go on South American trips and use eBird, you know, it's or Merlin, it's pretty good, but you know, it's based on what's been put into it. So it doesn't work as well in places where there's not steady amount of birding going on.
You know, pardon me, also related, which is a Cornell related group, which is, or part is of the ornithology group, is the Birds of the World, and it's just been put into Spanish. And
Yeah.
Birds of the World, for those of you who may not know it, is available online. It's like an online state-of-the-art encyclopedia of like the top scholar in every area, or top scholars write articles on every single bird species there is. And they're now putting that whole encyclopedia into Spanish as the second language. They have other languages planned, but that's stunning.
Yeah, very much so.
Maureen Dwyer asks, recently there appears to be a great deal of attention to night lighting of buildings and cities to avoid bird deaths. Did your research touch on this area?
Yeah, and this is an encouraging piece, something that, you know, you don't have to have federal agencies participate in to make work. There's about 20 municipalities that have put together Lights Out. And for those, if you don't know, basically, it's a whole avenue of thinking that you don't have to have conservation year round. It can be temporary. So, you know, birds are at the height of their migration through, you know, a place like Chicago, which is the leading trouble spot for birds going down the middle flyway. If they can get the people to turn the lights off during 3 weeks of peak migration, you can have a lot of impact. So that's a great new development that should spread much more, should be much more plentiful than it is, but it's going pretty well.
That's great. Are there any more questions?
Not seeing chat
Let me
either.
add one thing about that Lights Out. I hope that you have discovered Birdcast. And Birdcast is another Cornell idea that is and part of the 3 billion bird research was based on using weather radar to be able to follow the flights of birds overhead. Because it turns out that there's a new kind of weather radar put into place all over the US that can be tuned not just to pick up rainfall, which is what it's designed for, but to identify birds. So they're able to follow the migration through the sky and determine how many birds are going overhead. Well, Birdcast, which is another free app at Cornell, will tell you how many birds are going over your home in any one night. And it's fascinating to start following that. Once you do, you can't stop. It will show you, you know, that this is a huge night or this is not a big night. And why that's important is because those birds are going to come down on their trip for a day or two in your area. You'll be able to see, you know, all of a sudden you're seeing this warbler or this migratory coastal bird. It's just a fascinating thing. So be sure you're using that.
You access that how?
Well, you just put in Birdcast. It's not a standalone app right now, but it's just there's a website. You can
I put it in the
phone
chat.
Yeah, great.
Birdcast.info.
Great.
Well, if
Great.
there aren't more questions, I'll just say that I put in this information that's on the screen in the chat, so you can tune into that on our website. We're in the midst of these interviews over the 3 billion bird research, and what we're really trying to say there is what's being done now, what's happened in that 5 years, how can we contribute to that? So we're doing deep interviews spaced out over the fall, and so there's always one up there, and they're transcripts of these interviews, so you can see exactly what these people are saying and follow that. I hope you'll read the book. I know you've got, we made a deal where you, rather than a fee, I just like to have you buy books and spread them around amongst yourselves.
Great.
Also buy the book. It's getting cheaper a little, and that's a great way to follow the story. And don't forget that it's rich with advice as well as storytelling. And people tell us, I don't want to brag on my own self, but people tell us from the New York Times to the Washington Post that it's a great read. So don't listen to me, listen to what they have to say.
This is great. Thank you so much. I also wanted to just ask you, these updates that you're putting, you say they're available on your Facebook page, your Facebook?
No, not Facebook, on our website.
On your website. Great. So let's all
that,
make note of that.
Yeah, we on Facebook, we just post, interesting stuff that anybody's doing about birds.
Great.
But on the website, flyinglessons.us, not .com, .us, what we're learning from the birds. That's where we have 200 posts on that, tons of pictures. All these pictures are up there, and a lot of information about what you can do to help birds.
Very good. I can't thank you enough. This is fascinating.
Thank you
to be continued. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anders.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
All right. So I would just like to let everybody know of 2 upcoming events in detail. One is this coming Wednesday, not this coming Wednesday, but a week from this Wednesday, there will be a live meeting. And one of our 3 of the Sarasota Audubon year at the Nature Center, it will be called, it's a meet and greet talk. And at the Nature Center, 2 to 3:30, November 20th. And the speaker will be the Mote Marine Laboratories naturalist Jason Robert Shaw, talking about conservation, restoration, and monitoring of things as like sharks, manatees, sea turtles, corals. So be sure to attend. We'd love to actually see you and meet you in person, but I do urge you to register. Do not just show up without registering. The Nature Center is somewhat limited in its capacity, and we'd love to have you come, but we can't, if we're in an overflow state, unless you're registered, we can't let you in because of the fire department's regulations. But we hope to see you on November 20th in the afternoon, 2 to 3:30. And in December 9th, we will have Scott Harris showing photography of his big raptor year, photographs of raptors, hawks, all kinds of hawks, in a quest that he did over 34 states in the United States. So we look forward to seeing you at these events, and thank you so much for tonight.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
And I'll be sending out the latest action alert for a quick, I put a new button in and it'll generate the email for you to email the planners. So,
And
Okay.
please do absolutely take the time to send that out immediately, right, Sarah? Because this is to save what we hopefully save the land across from the farm is going to go. If the planning commission doesn't give it goes ahead and gives the developers rezoning permission, that takes very important environmental concerns away from Sarasota, Audubon, and Celery Fields. And just to remind you all, Celery Fields is one of the #1 tourist attractions, more than golf, in Sarasota County. And many people do not realize that, because birders can be loners.
It's actually one of the top 3 birding sites in all of Florida. If you look at eBird, as far as ranked locations, Celery Fields is in the top 3.
Great.
It's also, so the planning commission meeting, if the planning commission recommends rezone, it will go to the Board of County Commissioners. We believe that would happen in January. So there's still an opportunity after this that we could stop at in front of the county commissioners. It will go before them, sort of whether they recommend it or not. It just helps a lot if they do not recommend rezone. So that's why it's really important and critical now that we get the message out that we don't want the planning commission to recommend rezone, and we do not want those houses going in so close to such an amenity here in Sarasota.
In fact, Sarah, in my experience here, if the planning commission approves the rezone, the commissioners, which is the final step, really don't care. It's like, I hope, maybe I'm off the record here, but this is the planning commission. It's now to protest. Please send your opposition in now.
They do heavily consider what the planning commission says.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank
They
you.
do have their own reasons for voting the way that they do, I think, on the county commission, but they are heavily influenced by the report of the planning commission.
Right.
Yes.
okay. All right. Well, good night all, and we'll
Good
see
night, everybody.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all so
Sarah.
much.